Everyone tells you to set goals, write them down, visualize them, manifest them, but here is the problem no one admits. Most people with goals never gain power. They become anxious, frustrated, obsessed with outcomes they cannot control. And while they stare at the horizon, someone else quietly rearranges the chessboard beneath their feet. Today, we solve that problem. We delete your goals and replace them with something far more dangerous. Goals create illusion, not power. Let me begin with something that may disturb you. You have been taught to worship goals. From childhood, they handed you targets like sacred objects. Get the grades, earn the title, reach the number. Build the dream, and you believed that if you chased these shining markers long enough, power would eventually kneel before you. But here is the deception. A goal is not power. A goal is a picture in your mind. Power is a position in reality. And those two are rarely the same. When Niccolò Machiavelli observed rulers in Florence, he did not see princes failing because they lacked ambition. He saw them falling because they were attached to outcomes instead of control. They wanted victory, admiration, expansion. They had goals, but they did not control the mechanisms that produced those results, so they lost. You must understand something brutal about human psychology. The moment you set a goal, you emotionally attach yourself to a future event that does not yet exist. Your nervous system begins to crave it, your identity begins to wrap around it, your self-worth quietly negotiates with it. If I achieve this, I matter. And now you are no longer strategic, you are dependent. A man chasing a goal is easy to manipulate. Offer him a shortcut and he will compromise. Offer him applause and he will perform. Offer him fear of failure and he will obey. Because his eyes are fixed on the prize. And when your eyes are fixed forward, you fail to see who is rearranging the ground beneath you. Machiavelli understood that desire clouds judgment. In The Prince, he does not instruct rulers to obsess over dreams. He instructs them to study power structures, alliances, military strength, public perception. He teaches them to eliminate dependency. Goals create illusion because they give you a false sense of progress. You write them down, you visualize them, you speak about them, and the mind rewards you with a small chemical satisfaction, as if movement has already occurred. But nothing structural has changed. No leverage has been gained. No position fortified. You feel productive, but you are only entertained. This is the geometry of illusion. A goal lives in imagination. Power lives in positioning. When you say, I want to be wealthy, you are focusing on an outcome, but wealth is a byproduct of systems, ownership, distribution, influence, scarcity, control. If you do not build or control those systems, your goal is a wish disguised as ambition. When you say, I want respect, you are again chasing an emotional response from others. Respect is not achieved by wanting it. It emerges when others calculate risk before crossing you. That calculation is built on reputation, scarcity, capability, and unpredictability. None of those come from goal setting. They come from structure. And here is the quiet danger no one tells you. Goals make you visible. The person who publicly declares his targets reveals his hunger, and hunger exposes weakness. The courtier who loudly desires promotion signals ambition to rivals. The entrepreneur obsessed with valuation signals desperation to investors. The influencer craving numbers signals dependency to the algorithm. Desire, when exposed, invites manipulation. Machiavelli would never advise you to reveal the shape of your longing. he would advise you to conceal it while strengthening the foundations beneath it. Because power does not chase, power attracts by necessity. The prince who obsesses over conquering new territory may neglect internal stability. The leader obsessed with public praise may ignore silent resentment. The businessman fixated on quarterly profit may destroy long-term leverage. Goals narrow perception. Power requires expanded awareness. When your identity fuses with a target, fear enters the equation. Fear of failure, fear of delay, fear of humiliation, and fear changes behavior. It makes you reactive instead of strategic. You rush, you overcommit, you negotiate poorly, you tolerate disrespect, you compromise standards, all because the goal has become more important than your position. And once your position weakens, the goal moves further away, the illusion deepens, you tell yourself you must want it more. But wanting has never built empires, control has. The ruler who survives is not the one with the grandest dream. It is the one who understands dependencies, incentives, perception, and timing. It is the one who builds structures that make certain outcomes inevitable. A goal says, I hope. Power says, given this structure, the result cannot escape me. This is the distinction that separates the ambitious from the dominant. And most people, without realizing it, choose illusion because illusion feels inspiring. Power feels cold. Illusion gives you excitement. Power demands calculation. Illusion tells you to look ahead. Power forces you to look around. And until you recognize that goals seduce the ego while position strengthens the hand, you will continue mistaking motion for control and desire for dominance while someone else, quieter and less emotional, constructs the architecture that determines who rises and who remains chasing shadows. Machiavelli's focus was never achievement. It was advantage. Let us strip away the myth. History remembers men for their achievements, victories, titles, conquests, wealth, influence, but achievement is what the crowd sees. Advantage is what the strategist builds. And if you study Niccolò Machiavelli carefully, you will notice something unsettling. He was not fascinated by success stories. He was obsessed with positioning, with leverage, with the invisible mechanics that allowed one man to dominate another long before a battle ever began. In The Prince, he does not romanticize glory. He dissects power like a surgeon. He studies why rulers fall, why alliances collapse, why public favor shifts, why mercenaries betray. He is not asking, how can a prince achieve greatness? He is asking, how can a prince secure advantage so thoroughly that achievement becomes a side effect? This is the distinction you have been missing. Achievement is an event. Advantage is a condition. An event can be taken from you. A condition is far harder to destroy. Imagine two men seeking influence. One chases followers, applause, recognition. He measures himself by visible achievement. The other quietly builds relationships with decision makers, studies the flow of information, understands incentives, positions himself where value must pass through him. The first man celebrates milestones. The second man designs dependency, who holds power. Machiavelli lived in the ruthless political climate of Florence, where governments shifted like sand and loyalty was often a costume. Achievement in such an environment was fragile. Today you are celebrated. Tomorrow you are exiled. If he had focused on achievement alone, he would have misunderstood the game entirely. Instead, he studied advantage. He observed that a ruler with strong military foundations calculated cruelty and controlled public perception could survive storms that destroyed more beloved leaders. Not because he was admired, not because he had achieved more, but because he had constructed asymmetry. Asymmetry is the essence of advantage. It is the imbalance that makes opposition costly. Most modern ambition is symmetrical. You work hard, others work hard, you compete openly, you measure progress with numbers everyone can see. This is exhausting because it keeps you in a horizontal struggle. Machiavelli thought vertically. He believed the wise ruler must create situations where rivals cannot compete on equal terms. If you control resources, you dictate terms. If you understand timing, you strike when others hesitate. If you command perception, you influence judgment before action even occurs. That is advantage, and here is where you must confront something uncomfortable. When you obsess over achievement, you become visible, you announce your climb, you measure your steps. You compare yourself to others, you attach your identity to public markers. But when you focus on advantage, you move differently. You build quietly, you observe more than you speak, you strengthen foundations no one applauds. Achievement seeks validation. Advantage seeks control. Look carefully at the leaders who endure. They are rarely the loudest dreamers. They are the architects of environments. They shape incentives so others act in ways that benefit them. They do not chase loyalty, they make betrayal irrational. They do not demand respect, they structure consequences. In this way, achievement becomes secondary. Consider how often people collapse after reaching their goals. The entrepreneur who sells his company and loses direction. The executive who attains status and becomes complacent. The public figure who achieves fame and cannot maintain influence. Why does this happen? Because they built toward an event, not a position. Machiavelli would consider this a strategic error. To him, a ruler's true concern was sustainability of power, not applause, not moral approval, not even temporary victory. Sustainability requires advantage layered upon advantage. Control of arms, control of narrative, control of alliances, control of fear and favor in precise proportion. He understood that fortune is unpredictable. Circumstances change, crises erupt, public opinion shifts. If you define yourself by achievements alone, fortune can strip you of identity in a single season. But if you define yourself by structural advantage, you adapt. You do not panic when events turn. You adjust levers. You shift alliances. You reframe perception. You remain dangerous because your strength is not tied to one visible success. This is why achievement can be celebrated by the masses, yet advantage is rarely understood by them. The masses worship results, the strategist studies leverage, and in your own life this distinction is everything. If you chase income as an achievement, you will feel constant pressure to produce. If you build systems that generate income regardless of your mood, you have advantage. If you chase status, you become dependent on recognition. If you cultivate rare skills and strategic alliances, status becomes a byproduct. Machiavelli did not teach princes to dream of crowns. He taught them to secure the throne so thoroughly that challengers reconsidered their ambition before acting. He did not admire rulers who merely won wars. He analyzed rulers who made war unnecessary because opposition had already calculated defeat. This is the lens you must adopt. Achievement is a trophy displayed after the battle. Advantage is the terrain chosen before it begins. And the man who understands terrain, timing, and leverage does not obsess over whether he will win. He studies how to make loss. Structurally improbable outcomes are uncontrollable. Position is not. There is a silent frustration that follows ambitious people everywhere. You work, you plan, you sacrifice. You calculate your moves carefully, and yet the outcome does not always obey you. The deal collapses. The opportunity shifts. The recognition goes elsewhere. The market turns. The public mood changes, and you are left questioning your effort. This is where most people break, because they have built their identity around outcomes. But outcomes are volatile. They are shaped by forces beyond your reach. Timing, politics, perception, luck, hidden alliances, unseen variables. You can influence them, yes, but you cannot command them. And if you anchor your confidence to something you cannot command, you will live in subtle anxiety. This is the error Machiavelli refused to make. When Niccolò Machiavelli studied rulers in Florence, he witnessed men destroyed not because they lacked ambition, but because they trusted fortune too much. They assumed yesterday's victory guaranteed tomorrow's loyalty. They assumed public approval meant stability. They mistook temporary outcomes for permanent strength. In The Prince, he speaks often of fortune, that unpredictable force that governs half of human affairs. He does not deny its existence. He does not pretend outcomes can be fully controlled. Instead, he shifts focus. If fortune controls half, then the other half belongs to preparation, structure, and positioning is within your control. You cannot control whether people applaud you. You can control the value you accumulate. You cannot control market fluctuations. You can control the skills and leverage you build. You cannot control public opinion. You can control how indispensable you become. Do you see the difference? Outcomes are external reactions. Position is internal architecture. Most people aim at the reaction. They want the promotion, the profit, the praise. They obsess over the scoreboard. But the scoreboard is a reflection of a deeper structure. If that structure is weak, the numbers fluctuate wildly, and when they fall, panic begins. Machiavelli would call this fragility. The ruler who relies on mercenaries may win a battle. That is an outcome. But he does not control those soldiers' loyalty. He does not control their fear or greed. His victory is borrowed, and borrowed power is temporary. But the ruler who builds his own army controls discipline, allegiance, and strategy. Even if he loses a battle, his position remains intact. He can regroup, he can adapt, he can strike again. Position absorbs shock. Outcomes collapse under pressure. Think about your own life. When you chase outcomes, you become emotionally reactive. A rejection feels like a verdict on your worth. A delay feels like failure. A missed target feels like humiliation. Your mood swings with every external response. But when you focus on position, you become strategic instead of emotional. If a proposal fails, you examine leverage. If revenue dips, you analyze dependencies. If influence fades, you reassess alliances. You do not collapse because your identity is not tied to the applause of the moment. This is psychological sovereignty. Machiavelli understood that stability in unstable environments requires detachment from immediate results. The prince must be willing to endure temporary unpopularity if it strengthens long-term control. He must be willing to appear harsh if it prevents rebellion. He must value durability over admiration. That is a man who understands that outcomes fluctuate, position endures. Here is the uncomfortable truth. When you obsess over outcomes, you surrender your emotional state to forces you cannot see. Algorithms change, executives make decisions behind closed doors, cultural tides shift overnight, and suddenly the result you were certain of disappears. But if you have built rare skills, cultivated strategic relationships, secured independent assets, strengthened your reputation for competence, you remain dangerous regardless of circumstance. You are not begging the system to reward you. You have made yourself difficult to ignore. This is why positioning eliminates desperation. The person who needs a single outcome to validate them negotiates poorly. They accept unfavorable terms. They rush decisions. They reveal anxiety. Their need is visible. But the person who has options, leverage, and structural strength can walk away. And the ability to walk away is one of the purest forms of power. Machiavelli would never advise you to chase the crown blindly. He would advise you to secure influence over those who decide who wears it. He would never tell you to cling to fortune. He would tell you to fortify yourself against its betrayal. Outcomes are moments. Position is momentum. Moments can vanish. Momentum compounds. And when you understand this, your behavior changes. You stop obsessing over immediate victories. You stop panicking at temporary losses. You focus instead on strengthening the ground beneath you. You become patient because you know that strong positioning eventually constrains outcomes in your favor. You are no longer hoping events align. You are shaping the terrain so that when events unfold, they unfold around your strength, and in that shift from chasing results to engineering position, anxiety begins to dissolve and strategy begins to sharpen, because you finally understand that while you cannot command the storm, you can decide whether you stand exposed in the open or fortified behind walls you deliberately built. Identity targets. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. Who are you without your goals? If the promotion vanished, if the business failed, if the recognition never arrived, would there still be something solid beneath you? Most people build their identity around targets. I am the future CEO. I am the upcoming creator. I am the entrepreneur building $1 million brand. They attach who they are to what they are trying to achieve. And that is a dangerous construction, because targets can be missed. When they fall, identity cracks. This is why so many ambitious individuals collapse after failure. It is not the loss of money or status that destroys them. It is the collapse of self-image. The story they told themselves about who they were no longer aligns with reality. But if you study Niccolò Machiavelli carefully, you will notice something chilling. He did not teach princes to define themselves by victories. He taught them to define themselves by characteristics, decisiveness, adaptability, strategic cruelty when necessary, controlled generosity, emotional discipline, calculated unpredictability. These were not targets, they were traits. In The Prince, he explains that a ruler must learn how not to be good when circumstances demand it. That sentence alone reveals everything about identity. The prince is not locked into moral vanity or public approval. He is defined by flexibility and strength, not by rigid labels. Identity, in Machiavellian terms, is engineered. It is built intentionally, and it is far more powerful than any written goal. Targets live in the future. Identity operates in the present. If your target is wealth, you wake up thinking about money. If your identity is that of a disciplined strategist who compounds value daily, your actions align automatically. You do not chase wealth emotionally. You behave in ways that generate it as a byproduct. This is the shift. Targets require motivation. Identity generates behavior. When your identity is fragile, you need constant reminders. Vision boards, affirmations, external validation. But when your identity is structured around standards, you act consistently even when no one is watching. Machiavelli observed rulers in volatile environments like Florence, where alliances shifted overnight and loyalty dissolved under pressure. A prince who defined himself by being loved would eventually face betrayal. A prince who defined himself by being feared without being hated had a more stable foundation. He understood that perception could change quickly. Identity had to remain firm. Ask yourself this: are you trying to achieve something, or are you becoming someone? Because these are not the same. When you chase a target, you negotiate with your standards. You cut corners, you rush growth, you compromise discipline, you tell yourself it is temporary because the goal justifies the means. But every compromise weakens identity, and once identity weakens, power leaks. Machiavelli did not advise recklessness. He advised control. The prince must appear virtuous, even if he is not always so. Why? Because identity is not only internal. It is projected. It shapes how others calculate risk around you. If your identity signals emotional instability, people test you. If your identity signals desperation, people exploit you. If your identity signals unpredictability combined with competence, people hesitate. That hesitation is power. Targets cannot create that. Identity does. Imagine two individuals seeking leadership. One declares his ambition openly. He speaks constantly about where he intends to go. The other says little, but consistently demonstrates discipline, strategic thinking, emotional restraint, and competence under pressure. When crisis strikes, who is chosen? The one whose identity already fits the role, not the one who desired it most. This is why identity precedes elevation. In your own life, if you identify as someone who keeps promises to yourself, discipline becomes automatic. If you identify as someone who never negotiates with weakness, resilience strengthens. If you identify as someone who studies systems rather than reacting emotionally, clarity sharpens. These are structural advantages. Targets fluctuate, identity compounds, and here is the deeper layer most people ignore. When you anchor yourself to identity instead of targets, failure becomes information rather than humiliation. You do not say, "I failed, therefore I am nothing." You say, "That tactic failed, but I remain disciplined, observant, strategic." The core remains intact. Machiavelli respected rulers who could absorb shock without collapsing psychologically, because instability inside the leader spreads outward into the state. The same applies to you. If your internal identity shifts with every external result, your life becomes chaotic. But when your identity is engineered around strength, adaptability, and standards, the world may fluctuate while you remain composed. You stop needing to announce your goals, you stop performing ambition, you become quiet, controlled, deliberate. And over time, people begin to sense something different about you. Not loud confidence, not desperate hunger, but stability, calculated movement, emotional distance from outcomes. They cannot easily predict you. They cannot easily pressure you. because you are no longer chasing a target that can be withheld from you. You are becoming a force that shapes the environment itself through consistency of character and strategic restraint. And in that transformation from goal-driven to identity-driven, you stop asking whether you will reach the throne and start embodying the traits of someone who was never meant to kneel. Conclusion: delete the fantasy. Build the throne. You were taught to chase goals, to write them down, to repeat them, to visualize them until they felt real. But goals are fragile. They depend on outcomes. Outcomes depend on forces you do not control. And anything that controls your emotional stability controls you. That is not power. Niccolò Machiavelli never trained rulers to dream better dreams. He trained them to survive storms. In The Prince, the lesson was never achieve greatness. The lesson was secure your position so thoroughly that greatness becomes inevitable. Delete the goal, replace it with advantage, replace it with positioning, replace it with identity, because when you stop obsessing over outcomes, you stop negotiating with desperation. When you stop announcing targets, you stop revealing hunger. When you stop tying your worth to results, you become emotionally untouchable. And the moment you become untouchable, your decisions sharpen. You begin to design environments instead of chasing applause. You accumulate leverage instead of collecting validation. You engineer character instead of fantasizing about victory. Goals excite the ego, structure empowers the strategist, and here is the quiet truth that most will never understand. The ruler does not wake up asking, "Will I win?" He wakes up asking, "Have I arranged the board so that losing is unlikely?" That is the method, not inspiration, not motivation, design. So delete your goals, not because ambition is wrong, but because ambition without architecture is self-sabotage. Build position, build leverage, build identity so stable that fortune itself struggles to shake it. And one day you will notice something strange. You are no longer chasing success. Success has fewer places left to go besides you.